June 4, 1943, Railroad Street, Moshaw, Texas. The pencil shook a bit as Hunter Offizier Werner Burkhardt jotted down his thoughts in a secret diary, noting words that could lead to his isolation if found by his fellow officers. The Americans must be deceiving us. No country could have such wealth while engaged in a war on two fronts. Through the train window, he had just seen something that contradicted 3 years of Nazi propaganda. Electric lights shone brightly from every farmhouse, every street corner, every shop window, creating an unending array of lights across the Texas plains at 10 o'clock at night. In Germany, blackout regulations had thrown the Reich into darkness since 1940. Even prior to the war, only about 20% of rural German farms had electricity. In stark contrast, in what Nazi propaganda labeled a decadent, crumbled America, electricity flowed freely. 1,850 veterans from Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps disembarked from the passenger train, no cattle cars or freight wagons, but plush Pullman coaches complete with dining services and sleeping berths. The entire population of Mechia had gathered to witness their arrival. What they were unaware of was that this moment would spark the most significant psychological shift in modern POW history, a systematic dismantling of Nazi ideology through the impressive display of American industrial might. The mathematics behind the Allied victory were not being crafted in battle strategies, but rather in production figures that would soon overturn every belief these soldiers held about their foes, their country, and their mission. The decline had started on May 13, 1943, in Tunisia. General Jürgen von Arnim, who took over from Rommel, surrendered along with around 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian troops. The figures fluctuated as scattered units continued to capitulate over the following days. The Wehrmacht's most seasoned desert fighters, who had pushed the British back to Egypt and had gained the reluctant admiration of Montgomery himself, were suddenly in captivity. Among them was Hauptmann Friedrich Radke, a veteran of the France campaign and a holder of the Iron Cross First Class, who had been wounded twice in North Africa. His diary, uncovered decades later in the National Archives, would offer historians the most comprehensive insight into the psychological effects of American captivity on German soldiers. The transition from defeat to understanding started at the port of Oran, Algeria. While Radke and 30,000 other POWs waited in temporary camps for transport ships, American efficiency was already beginning to challenge their preconceived notions. The U.S. Army processed thousands of prisoners each day, with an organizational precision that surpassed anything the Wehrmacht had achieved, even at its peak. Identity cards were photographed and stored. Medical exams were done. Vaccinations were given. American officers, specifically trained for this occasion, explained our Geneva Convention rights fluently in German. However, the first real shock came when we received food. Oberstfreiter Hans Merler, captured with the 21st Panzer Division, wrote to his mother 8 months later. While we were in the cage at Oran, waiting for ships, the Americans provided us with better meals than we had during 6 months of desert combat. White bread, real coffee, meat twice a day. We thought it was just propaganda aimed at impressing us. We didn't realize this was their usual military ration. The Liberty ships that transported them across the Atlantic were remarkable examples of American industrial might. The SS Robert E. Peary was constructed in just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes at Kaiser Shipyards in Richmond, California, a feat that would have been deemed impossible propaganda if the Germans had been aware. These ships, produced at a peak rate of 3 per day, were returning after delivering supplies to the European front. Instead of coming back empty, they brought back up to 30,000 POWs each month by the summer of 1943. The 2-week journey across the Atlantic in July 1943 marked the second phase of psychological warfare. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann of the 90th Light Division kept a detailed record that was preserved in letters to his family after he returned home. He observed that the ship's crew discarded more food waste each day than his entire company received in weekly rations during the last months in Africa. Zimmermann wrote that the American sailors tossed away half-eaten steaks, whole loaves of bread, and gallons of milk that had gone bad. They did this openly and thoughtlessly, not to insult us, but because this waste meant nothing to them. Their supply was endless. The ships themselves turned into floating symbols of American power. The POWs learned that the vessel transporting them was one of 2,710 Liberty ships that would be constructed during the war. Each one needed 250,000 parts put together from components made in 32 states. The engines, as learned from chatty American guards, were produced in 3 different factories, each generating 900 horsepower cylinders that were then assembled in ports that had barely been established 2 years prior. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Stobern, from an aristocratic Prussian family that had fought in every German war since Frederick the Great, would later note in his memoirs, "As our ship neared the American coast, I observed the radar antenna turning above the bridge. This technology, which we thought was exclusive to us and possibly the British in limited amounts, was standard on a cargo ship. It was at that moment I first began to think that Germany had already lost the war." August 2, 1943. Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. My initial glimpse of America shattered the last traces of Nazi propaganda regarding American industrial weakness. The Norfolk base covered 4,300 acres, with its docks extending for miles and cranes loading and unloading dozens of ships at once. In just one day, this single port managed more tonnage than the entire German port of Hamburg did in a week. Gefreiter Johann Weber, a factory worker from the Ruhr before being drafted, observed 47 cargo ships at different stages of loading or unloading. He noted in his secret diary that each crane lifted loads that would have required a dozen men and horses back in Germany. They traveled using electric power, moving smoothly and continuously, without the choking cold smoke that polluted our industrial cities. The prisoners were organized into columns for their march to the waiting trains. Along the way, they passed parking lots filled with civilian cars, hundreds belonging to dock workers. In Germany, owning a private car was still a privilege reserved for the wealthy and party elite. The Volkswagen, which had been promised to the German people since 1934, remained a distant dream, with fewer than 1,000 ever reaching civilians. Here, regular workers drove to work in their own vehicles. But nothing could prepare them for the trains themselves. Not boxcars, nor the 40-and-8 wagons that had transported German soldiers across Europe, but actual passenger coaches. Pullman cars with cushioned seats that turned into sleeping berths, dining cars adorned with white tablecloths and silver cutlery, observation cars offering panoramic views. Hauptmann Radke noted that we boarded like tourists rather than prisoners. The American guards appeared almost embarrassed by the comfort. One sergeant even apologized for the air conditioning not working well in our car. Air conditioning. In August, we thought such luxury was reserved for Hitler's personal train. The 3-day train ride from Norfolk to the camps in Texas and Oklahoma would ultimately undermine Nazi ideology more than any military defeat could. As the trains traveled through Virginia, the prisoners leaned against the windows, seeing an America that contradicted everything they had been taught. Every small town shone brightly. Martinsville, Danville, Greensboro, communities that in Germany would have been fortunate to have a single electric street lamp boasted lit storefronts, neon signs, and homes with lights on in several rooms. The trains passed factories operating night shifts, their windows aglow, and parking lots bustling even at midnight. Oberstfreiter Merler, whose father was a Nazi party bloc leader in Hamburg, wrote in a letter found in 1987. That first night, we traveled through countless cities. Each one had more electricity than all of Hamburg combined. The guards insisted this was typical, claiming every American town had electricity since the 1920s. I called him a liar, but he just shrugged and said we'd see for ourselves. In Roanoke, Virginia, the train halted to take on water and coal. The prisoners observed as American railway workers accomplished in 30 minutes what would have taken 2 hours back in Germany. Automated coal loaders, electric water pumps, and mechanized lubrication systems showcased their technological edge. Even more unsettling was the apparent wealth of the workers themselves. They wore leather boots that would have cost a German worker 2 months' salary. They drank Coca-Cola from glass bottles and tossed the empties into bins without a second thought. They smoked cigarettes non-stop, extinguishing them while still half-lit. Feldwebel Heinrich Mühlmann, an electrical engineer from Siemens before the war, estimated that the single railway yard they stopped in consumed more electricity in 1 hour than his entire district in Berlin did in a day. The waste was astounding, he noted. They left lights on in empty buildings. Electric fans whirred in unoccupied rooms. It was the recklessness of boundless resources. As the trains moved through Tennessee and Kentucky, the prisoners witnessed the full might of American industry on display. Through the windows, they observed the vast factories, each one bigger than anything most had encountered in Germany. The Alcoa aluminum plant in Tennessee extended for 3 miles along the river, with its electric furnaces consuming 175,000 kilowatts of power, more than the entire city of Munich. As they approached Louisville, the train slowed while passing the Rubber Town complex, where synthetic rubber plants had emerged from barren fields in just 18 months. For enormous facilities, each employing thousands of workers, produced 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber every year. Germany, despite being the birthplace of the process, had never exceeded 120,000 tons in its peak year. Oberleutnant Erich Hoffmann, a chemist with IG Farben, grasped the significance right away. In a post-war interview, he recalled, "I knew those plants. I could picture the distillation columns and catalytic crackers. Each facility was more advanced than anything we had constructed, and there were 4 of them in this one site alone. They informed us there were many more scattered throughout the country." The trains passed by Ford's Willow Run plant near Detroit, visible from miles away. This single factory, completed in just 9 months, produced a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. At peak output, 42,000 workers assembled bombers from 1,550,000 parts made by 1,500 subcontractors. The factory occupied 2.5 million square feet and consumed more electricity than the entire city of Cologne, Germany. Hauptmann Werner Kleist, a Luftwaffe pilot who had been shot down in Tunisia, pressed his face against the window as we passed by. He spotted 17 B-24 bombers at various stages of assembly from the train. We had been told that American planes were subpar, thrown together quickly, and would disintegrate in battle, but I could see the precision of the assembly lines and the quality of the workmanship. These weren't inferior planes, they were just produced more rapidly than we could have imagined. As the train journeyed deeper into America, the myth of Nazi superiority was increasingly shattered. In St. Louis, they crossed the Mississippi River via the Eads Bridge, while below them, barges transported more grain than all of Germany produced in 1942. The prisoners could see grain elevators lining both shores, each capable of storing enough wheat to sustain a German city for months. Unteroffizier Karl Schmidt, a farmer's son from Bavaria, noted in his diary, "The Americans move food as we move ammunition endlessly and without worry about waste. I observed them loading a single barge with enough wheat to feed my entire village for 5 years. The crane operator was munching on a sandwich with meat thicker than our weekly ration." In Kansas City, the train made a stop at a large stockyard, where thousands of cattle awaited slaughter. The scent of meat packing plants wafted through the air for miles. German POWs, who had been lucky to have 200 grams of meat a week in Africa, observed American workers enjoying beef sandwiches during their lunch break. "They consumed meat the way we wished we could enjoy bread," wrote Gafrita Paul Fisher. No, that's not quite right. They ate meat as if it were the bread we longed for. The guard bought us hamburgers from a stand near the station, meat, cheese, and vegetables on white bread for 15 cents. He ordered 20 without hesitation, paying with a single dollar bill. This wasn't anything extraordinary, it was their everyday food. The arrival at the camps marked the next phase of mental collapse. Camp Hearn, Texas, completed in just 4 months, accommodated between 3,000 and 4,800 prisoners under conditions that surpassed what most had experienced as civilians. Wooden barracks featured electric lights, flush toilets, hot showers, and steam heating. Each building was made with more wood than entire German villages had. The camp hospital amazed the medical staff among the prisoners. Oberarzt, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Friedrich Bauer, chief surgeon of the 164th Light Division, found himself in a facility better equipped than most civilian hospitals in Germany. X-ray machines, surgical tools, and pharmaceutical supplies that had been missing in Germany since 1941 were all standard provisions for enemy prisoners. They had penicillin, as Dr. Bauer would later confirm. This miracle drug was something we had only heard about through rumors. They used it generously, even on prisoners with minor infections. German soldiers were dying from a lack of basic sulfur drugs, while the Americans provided us with their most advanced medicine without hesitation. The camp kitchen transformed into another example of American abundance. Prisoners assigned to cooking duties discovered walk-in refrigerators, electric mixers, automated dishwashers, and gas ranges capable of preparing meals for 5,000 men. The daily ration consisted of fresh milk, eggs, meat, vegetables, and white bread, quantities that Germans hadn't experienced since 1939. Feldwebel Otto Krebs, a former hotel chef from Munich, remarked, "Today we tossed away more food than my family has seen in 3 years." It wasn't spoiled food, just surplus. The American regulations mandate that we prepare 10% more than necessary to ensure every prisoner gets their full rations. The excess gets thrown away. I cried as I tossed perfectly good bread into the trash. By September 1943, the labor shortage in American agriculture resulted in the hiring of POWs for work in fields and factories nationwide. The vast fields of corn and wheat, factories operating around the clock, stores brimming with products, parking lots filled with cars, and homes equipped with refrigerators and radios. At a cotton gin near Houston, Untra Fitzgerald Lang observed a single machine processing more cotton in an hour than his entire village could manage in a month with traditional techniques. The gin operated on electricity supplied by the Colorado River Authority, part of a rural electrification initiative that had delivered power to 90% of Texas farms by 1943. The farmer who owned the gin was nothing out of the ordinary, Lang noted. He wasn't part of the elite, nor a political insider, just an everyday farmer. Yet, he enjoyed electricity, running water, a truck, a car, and a tractor. His workers, including black laborers, had lunch from boxes with more food than German workers received in a week. This was considered normal. Every farm we saw was the same. In Nebraska, prisoners toiled in sugar beet fields, witnessing an agricultural mechanization that was difficult to grasp. They discovered that a single combine harvester could accomplish the work of 100 men. The fields stretched endlessly, each one larger than entire counties in Germany. Farmers casually talked about harvests that would seem like a dream back home. They produced 60 bushels of wheat per acre, while the best German land yielded only 30. Gaff-writer Wilhelm Hoffmann, who was working on a farm near Scottsbluff, noted, "The farmer's son, just 16, was driving a tractor worth more than everything my father earned in his entire life." When I brought this up, the boy chuckled and said it wasn't even a particularly impressive tractor. His father was expecting a new model from John Deere that would be even more advanced. The most shocking discoveries were made by the prisoners who labored near or within American factories. Although the Geneva Convention forbade direct involvement in war production, POWs were allowed to work in sectors that enabled American workers to focus on military output. This loophole permitted thousands of German prisoners to see American industrial strength up close. At a Campbell's soup factory in New Jersey, they observed production lines that processed more tomatoes in a single day than many German factories managed in an entire month. The facility ran with a minimal staff of women and older men, as most young workers had gone to war, yet production levels surpassed those of peacetime. Stabsfeldwebel Ernst Wagner, who had been employed at a German food processing plant prior to the war, recorded his observations. Everything was automated, featuring electric conveyor belts, automatic filling machines, and steam cookers that handled hundreds of cans at once. An elderly woman oversaw controls that would have needed 50 workers in Germany, all while listening to the radio and sipping coffee. Near Detroit, prisoners unloading coal at a power plant caught sight of the automotive industry's shift to war production. The River Rouge complex, visible across the water, employed 100,000 workers who were manufacturing jeeps, aircraft engines, and tanks. One for work and another for family. We thought he was joking. By the winter of 1943, these observations were leading to what American intelligence officers referred to as ideological collapse syndrome among the prisoners. The Special Projects Division, part of the secret re-education program overseen by the Provost Marshal General's office, recorded a rising number of prisoners seeking access to American newspapers, books, and educational resources. Major Paul Newland, a member of the monitoring team, reported in December 1943 that the prisoners no longer disputed the production statistics presented to them. They had witnessed too much. Even the most fervent Nazis had fallen silent. While they still expressed loyalty to Germany, talk of victory had ceased. Many began to openly question the information they received about America. The camp newspapers created by the prisoners started to reflect this change. Der Ruf, the publication based at Fort Ken, Rhode Island, gradually transitioned from a stance of defiant nationalism to discussions about democracy, economic systems, and post-war rebuilding. The editors, who were carefully chosen anti-Nazi prisoners, found that their audience was increasingly open to these ideas. The treatment of Italian prisoners following Italy's surrender in September 1943. Italian POWs who chose to cooperate were organized into Italian service units, provided with better accommodations, higher pay, and greater freedoms. German prisoners observed their former allies collaborating with Americans, dining in American restaurants, and some even dating American women. Hauptmann Friedrich Schultz noted, "The Italians betrayed us, yet they received better treatment than we ever gave them as allies. They work freely, earn money, and send packages home. The Americans show them no animosity. This democracy we were taught to loathe seems more honorable than our own system." Christmas 1943 had a profound psychological effect. American organizations, churches, and civic groups sent 500,000 Christmas packages to German POWs, who had been trying to kill American soldiers just months before. Every package included cigarettes, candy, toiletries, and games. Local communities extended invitations to prisoners for Christmas dinners, but regulations barred most from participating. At Camp Hearn in Texas, the local Methodist church choir sang Christmas carols in German for the inmates. Women from Hearn contributed homemade cookies and cakes. The Boy Scouts brought handmade Christmas cards. This generosity toward adversaries dismantled the last vestiges of Nazi racial ideology. Oberleutnant Walter Müller, whose brother perished in the Hamburg bombing, remarked that they understand we are their foes. Many have sons and husbands battling our forces. Yet they demonstrated true Christian charity, offering not propaganda but sincere kindness. What kind of individuals treat their enemies in this manner? Only those who are completely confident in their victory and secure in their strength. The Christmas feast itself was beyond understanding. Turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, gravy, vegetables, pies, ice cream, amounts of food that Germany hadn't witnessed since before the First World War. The prisoners feasted until they felt ill, unable to grasp how such resources could be lavished on foes. "We dine like royalty," wrote Feldwebel Hans Richter, "better than German generals, better than party leaders." And this was not a rare occurrence. The guards informed us that this was a typical American Christmas dinner, one that every American family was enjoying. If they can provide this kind of food for prisoners, what do their own soldiers eat? By early 1944, more than 40,000 German prisoners had signed up for educational programs. They learned English, American history, mathematics, and various sciences. The University of Chicago offered correspondence courses, while Stanford University sent professors to teach about democracy and economics. Their desire for knowledge was unquenchable. Prisoners who had been told that Americans were culturally barbaric found libraries filled with millions of books, universities that accepted all social classes, and groundbreaking scientific research. They had the freedom to read American newspapers and explore diverse perspectives, an opportunity that was impossible in Nazi Germany. Hauptmann Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, a physicist drafted from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, participated in atomic physics lectures at Camp Shelby. He later remarked that American professors, including Jewish refugees from Germany, taught us without any animosity. They described science as a universal pursuit, belonging to all of humanity. They were years ahead of German research and shared their knowledge even with adversaries. This spirit of generosity was beyond the comprehension of those molded by Nazi ideology. The camp theaters screened American films, featuring not propaganda but typical Hollywood productions. Prisoners watched Gone with the Wind, relating to its portrayal of American defeat and resilience that mirrored their own circumstances. They observed The Grapes of Wrath, surprised that Americans would express such self-criticism towards their adversaries. They conceal nothing, noted Lieutenant Joseph Kramer. They reveal their issues, their shortcomings, their disputes, yet this transparency makes them more resilient, not less. In Germany, such criticism could lead to severe consequences. Here, it's seen as a sign of patriotism. In the spring of 1944, prisoner labor programs expanded as American production hit its peak. German POWs worked in canneries, mills, and manufacturing plants, witnessing the full force of American industrial power. The figures conveyed a narrative that no propaganda could refute. At the Higgins Boat Factory in New Orleans, prisoners unloaded steel destined to become landing craft for D-Day. They observed workers putting together 700 boats each month, with each boat needing 20,000 parts. The factory had a workforce of 20,000, which included many women who operated cranes, welded hulls, and supervised production lines. Stabsfeld Webelkert Zimmerman noted that women were doing traditionally male jobs, black individuals were handling complex machinery, and teenagers were operating drilling equipment. Everything we were told was unfeasible in a democracy. Yet, production never ceased. 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They manufactured more boats in a single month than our entire Navy constructed in a year. At Republic Steel in Ohio, prisoners observed the production of 10,000 tons of steel every day. The blast furnaces operated nonstop, constantly supplied by endless trains of iron ore from Minnesota and coal from Pennsylvania. The scale was beyond German understanding. This one plant produced more steel than the entire German output at its peak. I worked at Krupp before the war, wrote Oberstreiter Paul Hartmann. I believed I grasped industrial production, but this was beyond anything I could fathom. They wasted more steel in spillage than we could manufacture. The workers grumbled about overtime while turning out amounts we couldn't match even with slave labor and double shifts. The summer 1944 harvest shattered Nazi propaganda about American weakness. German prisoners labored throughout the Midwest, observing agricultural production capable of feeding the globe. In Kansas, they witnessed wheat harvests where individual farms yielded more grain than whole German provinces. Combines traversed fields like ships sailing across a golden sea, each harvesting 100 acres daily. The grain elevators they filled could store more wheat than Germany imported in a single year. Unteroffizier Franz Weber, a farmer from East Prussia, noted, "One American farmer with machinery accomplishes the work of 100 German farmers." They shared aerial photos of the wheat fields, stretching across thousands of square miles filled with grain. They could lose half their harvest and still have more than all of Europe combined. In California's Central Valley, inmates picked fruit from orchards that seemed to stretch endlessly. They witnessed perfectly good fruit being thrown away for minor imperfections, fruit that would have been cherished in Germany. Sometimes entire crops were plowed under to maintain market prices, a practice that led to psychological strain among prisoners who had come from hunger-stricken Germany. They destroyed food to keep prices stable, wrote gaff-writer Otto Schultz. Mountains of oranges were bulldozed into pits simply because there were too many. We pleaded to be allowed to send them to Germany, to our families. The guards were understanding but made it clear that it was not feasible. The waste was deliberate, evidence of boundless resources. June 6, 1944. When the camps received word of the Normandy invasion, German prisoners faced their ultimate ideological breakdown. The enormity of the operation, 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and 150,000 troops in the initial wave, showcased American organizational skills that surpassed anything Nazi Germany could imagine. Within days, prisoners at Camp Shelby viewed newsreels of the invasion. They witnessed the endless flow of ships, the makeshift harbors, and the supply networks that transported 15,000 tons of goods daily across open beaches. American humanity. In spite of propaganda portraying Americans as weak and sentimental, POWs found a people confident enough in their strength to show compassion. When gaff-writer Hans Muller's son lost his life in the Hamburg bombing, the American camp commander took the time to personally deliver the Red Cross message and express his condolences. When Lieutenant Paul Fisher's wife reached out for help in feeding their children, American church groups sent food packages to her in Germany. This was for civilians in a country that America was actively bombing. Hauptmann Otto Klist noted that they distinguished between the German people and the Nazi regime. They emphasized that their fight was against Hitler, not against Germans. This distinction, which might have seemed like propaganda, turned out to be sincere. They were preparing us to rebuild Germany after the war, rather than to destroy it. The medical care had a significant impact on the prisoners. German doctors collaborated with American medical personnel, gaining experience in new techniques and advanced equipment. Prisoners underwent surgeries that would typically be reserved for Germany's elite. Mental health care, almost unheard of in the Wehrmacht, was offered to soldiers suffering from trauma. Dr. Friedrich Bauer noted that they addressed attempted suicides with counseling rather than punishment. Prisoners experiencing mental breakdowns received therapy instead of abuse. This compassion shown towards enemies revealed a strength we had never recognized, the assurance of true power. By March 1945, the secret re-education program had achieved astonishing outcomes. More than 25,000 inmates signed up for democracy courses. The camp's newspapers ran articles on constitutional governance, free markets, and civil liberties. Discussion groups engaged in debates about Germany's future after the war. The program's achievements far surpassed all expectations. Prisoners who once identified as fervent Nazis began writing essays on democratic reconstruction. Officers who had pledged loyalty to Hitler were strategizing on how to apply American agricultural techniques in post-war Germany. "We became missionaries for democracy," admitted Oberst Hermann Göring, who is not related to the Reichsmarschall, in a 1975 interview. This transformation happened not through coercion or propaganda, but through observation. We witnessed its success. We observed regular people thriving more than the German aristocracy. We desired that for Germany. The change was so profound that American officials became concerned about prisoners being overly enthusiastic about American culture. Some even asked to remain in America after the war. Others married American women they met through prison pen pal programs. Thousands would ultimately migrate to America in the 1950s. April 1945 brought the ultimate revelation. As American troops liberated concentration camps in Germany, the footage was presented to German POWs. Many initially refused to accept it, insisting it was propaganda. "We thought we were fighting for a noble cause. We realized we were merely instruments of criminals. We believed we were bringing civilization to lesser peoples. Instead, we discovered that we were the real barbarians." The Americans we once labeled as weak and decadent demonstrated the true meaning of civilization. When the war concluded in May 1945, German POWs faced repatriation with a mix of feelings. They had experienced an America that defied all their prior beliefs. As prisoners, they ate better than they had as soldiers. They received more respect from their enemies than from their own government. The final months of confinement were dedicated to preparing for their return to a ravaged Germany. American authorities offered vocational training, agricultural education, and political instruction. The prisoners learned about the Marshall Plan before it was officially announced, realizing that America intended to rebuild rather than punish Germany. An understanding of how a democratic industrial society operates. The German POWs who witnessed American prosperity became unintended catalysts for change in post-war Germany. They had observed industrial efficiency, agricultural productivity, and democratic prosperity. They understood that reconstruction was achievable because they had seen a society that accomplished it. Numerous former POWs became influential figures in West Germany's rebuilding efforts. Hans Kroll, who was a prisoner at Camp Shelby, became West Germany's ambassador to the United States. Walter Hallstein, who taught at Camp Como, went on to become the president of the European Commission. Rudiger von Wechmer, who was held at Camp Horn, served as Germany's permanent representative to the United Nations. Edward Ackerman, a prisoner at Fort Robinson, emerged as a leader in German agricultural reform. They introduced American techniques to German industry, American efficiency to German agriculture, and American democratic principles to German politics. The economic miracle of the 1950s was partly based on insights gained in American prison camps. Prosperity arises from freedom, not from conquest, Hans Kroll noted in his memoirs. We observed that democracy generated wealth, diversity provided strength, and treating workers well boosted productivity. These lessons, learned during our imprisonment, helped shape the new Germany. Historians have described the German POW experience in America as one of the most effective re-education programs ever. Without force or traditional propaganda, American industrial strength and democracy transformed staunch Nazis into future democratic citizens. The program thrived because it focused on observation rather than rhetoric. Prisoners observed American society operating at its best, treating adversaries with respect. They saw an industrial power that rendered German production appear outdated. They lived a standard of life that revealed Nazi claims as mere illusions. Dr. Arnold Kramer, the foremost historian on German POWs in America, concluded that America triumphed in the propaganda battle not through clever tactics, but through undeniable reality. Every complete meal, every electric light, and every functional toilet served as a testament against Nazism. The prosperity experienced by the POWs led to their change in perspective. The statistics back this up. Out of the 371,683 German POWs in America, fewer than 1% tried to escape, with only 2,222 escape attempts recorded. Surveys conducted after the war indicated that 95% of them rated their treatment as good or excellent. Notably, thousands continued to correspond with American families for many years after the war. In 1985, marking the 40th anniversary of the war's conclusion, surviving German POWs held a reunion in Austin, Texas. More than 500 former prisoners returned to America, many bringing their families to show them where their journey of change had started. Former Obergefreiter Hans Wecker, who was detained at Fort Robinson in Nebraska and later returned to become a doctor in Georgetown, Maine, spoke at the reunion. Life in the camps was a significant improvement for many of us who had grown up in cold water flats in Germany. We found running water, central heating, and plenty of food. More importantly, we found dignity. Former Stabsfeld Webel Kurt Meyer, who had worked on farms in Iowa, added that the farmers treated us not as foes but as young men far from home. They shared their meals, their knowledge, and sometimes even their homes. This kindness from people whose sons were fighting against us changed us forever. During the reunion dinner in 1985, former Oberst Thurmangotz, who was 78 at the time, gave a keynote speech that encapsulated the core of our transformation. We arrived in America as foes, as Nazis, as followers of a falsehood. We departed as allies, as Democrats, as individuals who had recognized the truth. America taught us that true strength arises from productivity, not conquest, from diversity, not hatred, and from freedom, not tyranny. We witnessed the arsenal of democracy operating at full capacity. We observed farmers feeding the world, workers crafting the tools for victory, and citizens treating former enemies with respect. Thank you for guiding us. The auditorium erupted in a standing ovation, with Americans and Germans united. Former adversaries came together to celebrate a change that had once seemed impossible when those initial trains arrived in Texas in June 1943. The scale of the German POW experience in America can be captured through striking statistics that highlight both the extent of the operation and its impressive success. Camp infrastructure included over 500 camps spread across 45 states, with the exception of Nevada, North Dakota, and Vermont. There were 175 main camps and 325 branch camps, designed to accommodate between 250 and 12,000 prisoners each. Construction was typically completed in about 90 days for each camp. The prisoner population reached 371,683 German POWs, part of a total of 425,871 Axis POWs. The peak was in May 1945, with an average of 20,000 new arrivals each month in 1943, rising to 30,000 monthly after D-Day, and reaching 60,000 monthly during the final months of the war. Labor contributions included 14 million man-days of agricultural work, processing 100 million board feet of lumber, and generating $230 million in labor value, with a daily wage of 80 cents per prisoner. In 46 states, prisoners addressed significant labor shortages, with only 2,222 escape attempts reported among over 371,000 inmates, equating to 0.6%. There were no successful permanent escapes, as most escapees were recaptured within 24 hours, and no American civilians were harmed by escaped POWs. Regarding educational programs, over 40,000 individuals were enrolled in various courses, 135 camp newspapers were published, 30,000 were taking English classes, 15,000 participated in vocational training, and 8,000 engaged in university correspondence courses. Post-war immigration saw around 5,000 former POWs moving to the U.S. after the conflict. Over 12,000 kept in touch with American families, with the average correspondence lasting 31 years. Many later returned as tourists or business associates. In terms of treatment, 95% rated it as good or excellent, while 74% felt that their time in captivity positively influenced their worldview. Additionally, 61% showed interest in learning about democracy, and by 1945, fewer than 10% held strong Nazi beliefs. The German POWs who witnessed American industrial strength didn't just observe history, they were changed by it. Their captivity turned into education, their defeat into enlightenment, and their imprisonment into freedom from the ideological bonds of Nazism. Ultimately, America's most significant triumph was not achieved through military means but within the prison camps, where undeniable proof of democratic success achieved what armed forces could not. It fundamentally changed the perspectives of the enemy. The POWs entered with a belief in German superiority and American frailty but departed with a new understanding. The sheer scale of American industrial power was not only immense but also beyond the grasp of those molded by scarcity and oppression. The trains that transported them into captivity in 1943 had once carried soldiers of the Third Reich, while the ships that brought them back to Germany in 1946 carried champions of democracy. They had glimpsed the future, and it was successful. Their narrative serves as proof of a deep truth. The strongest weapon in America's arsenal wasn't military force, but the undeniable evidence of a free society's ability to generate abundance. The German POWs were astonished by American industrial power, but in the end, they were persuaded by it. Within their change lay the beginnings of Europe's post-war recovery and the ultimate downfall of the Nazi ideal. They returned to Germany not as vanquished foes, but as witnesses to the achievements of free societies. The economic miracle that reshaped West Germany in the 1950s was built on the groundwork established in American prison camps, where enemy soldiers discovered that prosperity arose not from conquest, but from freedom, not from racial superiority, but from human dignity, and not from totalitarian rule, but from democratic collaboration. The German POWs arrived in America expecting to find a weak, divided nation on the brink of failure. Instead, they encountered a vast industrial powerhouse full of strength and unexpected kindness. They came as captives, but departed as witnesses to the pinnacle of the arsenal of democracy. Their astonishment at America's abundance planted the psychological roots of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and the democratic rebuilding of Germany. They had experienced America, and it changed them forever. Their children would grow up in a democratic Germany, allied with the United States. This partnership was born from the transformation that started when veterans of the Afrika Korps disembarked in Mechia, Texas, realizing that everything they had believed was incorrect. The narrative of German POWs in America is ultimately one of redemption through insight. It demonstrates that sometimes the most significant victories come not from destruction, but from illustration, not from propaganda, but from prosperity, and not from animosity, but from humanity. The German soldiers who witnessed America's industrial power became unwitting ambassadors of democracy, returning home with the seeds of change that would grow into one of history's most successful reconstructions. Their evolution from Nazi fighters to democratic citizens stands as one of the most extraordinary transformations in modern history, achieved not through coercion, but through the undeniable proof of what free people can accomplish when they unite. Ultimately, that was America's secret weapon, not just the capability to produce more tanks and planes than any nation before, but the ability to turn foes into friends through the simple force of example. The German POWs were astounded by America's industrial strength, but more importantly, they were transformed by it, and within that transformation lay the groundwork for a better world.